My latest book, Minding Frankie, is a story about a whole group of people in a street, a community, a small community, who come together when there's a crisis. It's about a man called Noel, who's an alcoholic and in a very dead-end job, who suddenly discovers that he has fathered a baby girl. And it's a question of he'll have to look after her because her mother is dead. Now, the street is divided in its views. Is Noel a safe person to look after her? Should the baby be taken into care? Or should he be given the chance? Is this what's going to make him triumph over all his problems? People do seem to like the story because of the characters in it. I think it's all got to do with that. You see, I'm a person who doesn't believe that anyone is truly bad or truly good. And even in my dear friends, I can see some things that could be improved as they could with me, and I can see in bad people they have some redeeming qualities. And I think people like that. And also, I have a kind of a message, which is that we are in charge of our own lives and it's our own destiny, and this is what we can do. And I think it gives people courage. That's why. I used to read thrillers from the moment I was able to read grown-up books at all. I would read Raymond Chandler and Peter Cheney and all the rest of it. So, but I never wrote a thriller in my life. I still read thrillers, and as soon as there's a new one out by a new author, I go to look for it immediately. Working in a newspaper was absolutely great training to be a writer, because in a newspaper you never see a little blank page or half a column saying Maeve was too tired to write this today, or Maeve didn't have any ideas, so therefore you have to do. And there's a big kind of newspaper joke, which is always, don't get it right, get it written. And we're not afraid of an empty screen or a blank page, the same way as people who haven't worked in newspaper are. So I think it's a great training for people because it shows you can do it. I think we're more confident when we write about what we know about. For example, I don't write anything about high finance or about the world of horses and racing, or about any kind of sexual orgies, because these are not places that I'm familiar or comfortable. Instead, I write about what I do know and like, which is about friendships and families. And I can see, because I'm constantly looking and peering at people, I can see the problems and the misunderstandings and the kind of mounting mistakes that families and friends make. So that's really what I think is important. And I don't think you should write in a different manner. You should write the way you speak. Because suppose you were going to a party and you suddenly put on a different accent, an entirely different accent. First of all, it would be exhausting to keep it up. And secondly, people would wonder why you were speaking like that. So therefore, writers should write like themselves. When I first started to write, I wrote about what I could remember very well, which is my own time of my own childhood and teaching years in the 50s and 60s. But then, of course, the world moved on. The 50s and 60s seemed to be old-fashioned, so now I write about the modern world today. But in a book, nowadays, Minding Frankie particularly, I show that the recession has come to Ireland. The great glory days that we had for about 3 years, where Ireland was a terribly rich little country, have gone. And there's now a huge amount of international debt and worry and fear of emigration. So I tried to put it into the stories to try and catch up on what's happening in the present day. I used to do a lot of book signings when I was younger and more able-bodied, and I really loved meeting the readers because it was fascinating, the questions they would ask. They often asked what happened to the characters, what happened to them then, when after they'd left. They felt lonely without them. So that was a help to me. So I brought lots of them back in books again, in different roles, brought them back and suddenly discovered them again in other books. I didn't know that people were worried about what happened to them when they'd finished the book. That was good. People also asked questions about were they real people in the book that I was writing about. And I said, certainly not. I am a lawyer's daughter. And he said to me, my dear father said to me, do not put a real person in a book or we'll be paying the litigation for the rest of our lives. So these are people just from my imagination, just from my head. I think in Minding Frankie that I'd like people to come away with one idea afterwards. I'd like them to come away and think about very strongly, because a lot of people don't, whether a child is completely best with his or her natural parents, or whether somebody else can give equal love to the child, because it's a kind of, they call it an argument between nature and nurture. Which do you do? Is it the nature of the child who is your own flesh and blood, or is it nurture the way you look after it? And I have seen so many cases where nurture has worked perfectly that I'm inclined to be on that side.